Good evening, Tansianine. Welcome to APTN National News. I'm Daryl Stranger. The issue of pretendianism, or false claims to Indigenous identity, has reared its head in the Manitoba election campaign. A progressive Conservative candidate was taken to task for claiming to be Métis, a claim the Manitoba Métis Federation said was false. EP say they have 10 candidates declaring an Indigenous background. A quick count shows the Liberals and PCs have 4 each. When asked to provide their party's policy on verifying Indigenous identity, the PC's response was brief. The PC party does not police anyone's identity. The NDP provided a statement saying the Manitoba NDP has a rigorous vetting process, and we are proud of our candidates. We are fair and thorough in our assessment of candidates for the NDP. And the Liberals say they don't ask people to identify themselves based on their culture or orientation. In part, are you aware of any other material fact not otherwise disclosed in this form that, if publicly known, could be used by your opponents against you or the Manitoba Liberal Party? The writ for the Manitoba election dropped on September the 5th, and election day is set for October the 3rd. And as you just saw, we asked the 3 main parties what their policy is for verifying Indigenous identity claimed by a prospective candidate. For more, lawyer Jean Teye is here to talk. Jean, thank you so much for taking a few minutes today to speak with us. What do you think political parties need to do to ensure these claims are valid?
Claims to Indigenous identity, I think they need to be validated, first of all. So they need to ask for proof. That's the bottom line. Accepting people on an honor system simply doesn't work anymore because we've seen that people abuse that. So they have to ask for proof. And I don't think it's good enough to say you're searching for your identity or anything like that. So I think, and the political parties need to ask for proof before they claim they've got an Indigenous candidate, and they may need to make it clear to the public what their policy is on this and what their proof standard is, so that we have some light shining in on the political party's process.
So then, second to that, I suppose, why is it important for a candidate's heritage to be verified?
I just think we should be honest. Candidates should be telling the truth, and as we've seen, some candidates are not. And so since we've seen that there's a history of people pretending or claiming Indigenous heritage when they have no right to do so, I think then it makes us all have to check and double check. And political parties are the same as universities and government and employers. They should, if someone is putting this forward as a credential and claiming to be Indigenous and often claiming stolen trauma and things like this that make people feel sorry for them, or that, my goodness, look what they've overcome, and it's all a lie, then I think that we want our politicians more than anybody else to be telling us the truth. And if they're going to lie about that, then what else are they lying about? So I think it just undermines our faith in the political process. It undermines our faith in our elections. And we've seen this. We've seen it with George Santos in the United States, and the pack of lies that he bundled up to get elected. And we've seen it in Canada too. So my own personal take is that Indigenous identity, it's important that it be Indigenous people who determine who Indigenous their members are. And others, white folks, can't come along and just claim it, and we hold up our hands and say, well, there's nothing we can do about it. I don't think that's right. I think Indigenous people, we have to call them out, and I think that political parties have a responsibility to have a policy on it that checks, that demands proof, and that makes that policy very clear. So some Manitoba parties, the Liberal Party, has a very clear policy about it, but I'm not sure it's really well known out there. Conservatives don't seem to have much of anything, and I think the NDP also have one, so they all need it.
Well, so then last question here for you, Jean. Then who loses when these claims are made, especially in the political realm?
Well, I think the people who elect them. So if the people in that riding elect an MLA to the Manitoba legislature and that person is being elected, at least in part, on a false claim, then I think the electors have been duped. And I don't think that that's right. So again, I say honesty. We need to have clarity and honesty and integrity in our elections and in our elected officials. And so who loses? Indigenous people always lose on this one, because then no one believes anything that comes out anymore, and it makes the rest of us suspect. And that's really, really unfortunate part of this. But I think it just means we have to be vigilant, and we have to call people out when they're making claims that are invalid or that they can't substantiate or that we simply disagree with. So some candidate may be calling himself Métis. If the Manitoba Métis Federation stands up and says, no, you're not, then the rest of us should pay attention to that. Or if they claim they were Ojibwe or Saulteaux or Cree, then I think those nations should stand up and say, no, you're not. And then the rest of us should pay attention.
Well, certainly plenty to look forward to here, especially with this election. Jean, thank you so much for this. And again, we appreciate your time.
Thank you.
And with just under 3 weeks to go before the election, the Assembly Manitoba Chiefs and Elections Manitoba have introduced a form they say will make it easier for First Nations people who don't have proper ID to vote. Calling it groundbreaking, they've released the Declaration of First Nation Guarantor for Proof of Identity Voters form. AMC says the form will help First Nations members cast their vote October the 3rd, regardless of their access to traditional ID like driver's licenses or health cards. The form is available at electionsmanitoba.ca or manitobachiefs.com. First Nations people can also get the form at AMC's office in Winnipeg.
Government policies have, such as the Indian Act, and through enfranchisement, through residential and day schools, 6-day scoop, and more recently the CFS system, has deeply fragmented First Nations' ability to access their identification needed to vote in elections. So these are big, these are huge concerns that we had.
Well, we want to hear what you think about some of these changes and the upcoming Manitoba election. Here's how to continue the conversation. To read and watch our stories, you can visit aptnnews.ca. And if you have a story you want to share, send us an email at news@aptn.ca. You can find us online on your favorite social media sites as well, including TikTok, YouTube, LinkedIn, and X, previously known as Twitter. Be sure to follow APTN News to join the conversation and see our latest stories. A man and a woman were sentenced in Edmonton on Monday for their role in the death of 25-year-old Nature Duperon. Duperon was kidnapped by 4 people, injected with fentanyl multiple times, handcuffed, and left to die in the woods near Edson, Alberta in 2019. Buddy Underwood was convicted of second-degree murder. He was sentenced to life in prison with no chance of parole for 17 years. Tyra Muskego was sentenced to 12 years in prison for manslaughter. 2 others, Grayson Ishapi and Kayla Bejus, previously pled guilty to second-degree murder last fall. They were sentenced to life in prison with no chance of parole for 15 years. Manitoba RCMP's major crimes investigators have charged 3 men with murder in the death of James Vernon Giesbrecht, a Brandon man whose remains were found in the trunk of a burnt-out car 11 months ago. APTN's Leanne Sanders reports.
Let me be very clear. This was a calculated and planned murder. James knew his killers, and he was lured to his death.
Calling it a very complex investigation, RCMP have charged 28-year-old Redstone Wamdiska and 36-year-old Joseph Lindsay with first-degree murder in Giesbrecht's October 2022 death. 40-year-old Christopher Cutlip was charged with second-degree murder. All 3 were already in jail for unrelated convictions. RCMP say Giesbrecht had family ties to Peguis First Nation and knew all three men through Brandon's drug subculture.
James Vernon Giesbrecht was only 37 when he died. He lived in Brandon his entire whole life. He was a proud father, a brother, son, who worked hard to support and spend time with his loved ones in Brandon.
RCMP say Giesbrecht's remains were found in a burned-out car on October 13th last year near Brandon.
We also collected, as part of the investigation, DNA evidence throughout the investigation that was sent for testing, which helped us lead us to the suspects. Importantly, we also learned that James did not die as a result of the car fire.
The Honda Accord had been stolen from Regina, but had changed hands to one of the suspects. RCMP credited tips from the public in helping solve the case.
Well, not only because the public provided tips, but the public was willing to talk to investigators. They were willing to provide statements, and they were willing to get involved.
All three men remain in custody. Leanne Sanders, APTN National News, Winnipeg.
All right, we've reached the point in our show where we need to step aside for a moment, but first here's a look at a story soon to come.
I'm Tamara Pimentel on the Penamutang First Nation in Manitoba, where members are protesting ahead of an election for a new chief and council. It's a call for transparency and a chance to be heard.
They're going to be asking for band members to give them a vote for the next 4 years. But yet they didn't have a band meeting these 2 years. So does that mean for the next 4 years, band members are going to be in the dark?
I'll have that story soon on APTN National News.
Welcome back to APTN National News. A First Nation in the Yukon is speaking out about a pending agricultural land proposal. According to them, if approved, the project will result in serious impacts when it comes to hunting and the environment. As Sarah Connors tells us, the First Nation wants to see its settlements' lands respected and protected.
Airport Lake is a special place for the Little Salmon Carmacks First Nation. Located just over 40 kilometers south of Carmacks, Yukon, the First Nation uses the area year-round for things like cultural gatherings and retreats. Chief Nicole Tom says it's a place rich in fish, wildlife, and medicines.
You know, it's called the cornucopia because that's where you harvest.
But the First Nation argues the Airport Lake area may soon be under threat, all because of this tract of land. Located 1.5 kilometers from Airport Lake, proponents Jesse and Kimberly Walchuk have applied for 80 acres of Crown land to develop an oat farm. The territory's agriculture spot land program grants successful applicants private title for up to 160 acres of Crown land once the program's criteria is met by developing the land for agriculture. But the First Nation has many concerns, like how the fenced parcel will remove opportunities for hunting, trapping, and berry gathering from their settlement land.
In this case, because it's such a massive harvesting area, our rights are not being considered.
Tom believes the issue speaks to how there is a lack of land use planning in her First Nations traditional territory, something promised in their final agreement signed over 2 decades ago. She says elders have suggested placing a moratorium on their traditional territory until land use planning becomes a priority.
Until that happens, I think that's the solution for everything that's going on in the Yukon.
So I think the whole program is flawed. I think
the First Nation isn't alone. Carmacks resident Charles Lanstra says he's observed proponents snapping up viable agricultural land for their own personal use, including building private residences. He says hunters like himself are excluded from hunting within 1 kilometer from private homes.
So what we're seeing without proper land use planning is spot land applications going in sporadically and without any previous thought to it. And each time one goes in, it segments the area that people have available to them to hunt and to harvest wildlife in the area.
Jesse Walchuk said in an email to APTN, Little Salmon Carmacks First Nation has refused to meet and discuss the matter. He also claims he and his wife have amended their application so it won't impact the First Nation settlement land. Earlier this summer, the Yukon's Environmental and Socioeconomic Assessment Board recommended the application not go ahead due to adverse effects to things like environment, wildlife, and heritage resources. It's now up to the Yukon government to accept, vary, or reject that recommendation. As for Tom, she says her First Nation will do what it takes to protect their sacred areas.
Harvesting rights are integral to our culture and to who we are as a people.
Sarah Connors, APTN National News, Whitehorse.
All right, one more short break is upon us, but still ahead, a new book by Jordan River Anderson's sister hits the shelves.
I just felt like their story needed to be heard. And my father, who is still with us, he decided that, to give honor to Jordan.
Welcome back. It's time now for our photo of the day. From the beautiful region of Treaty 5 territory, Vernon Bushy shared this sunrise over the Rice River near Hollowater First Nation. Thanks so much for that photo, Vernon. Show us your territory, your lands, your home by sending your pictures to share@aptn.ca, and you can be our next photo of the day. All right, now let's look at tomorrow's weather forecast. Starting on the east coast, 19 in St. John's and 22 degrees in Halifax, 8 degrees in Kuujjuaq and 18 in Happy Valley Goose Bay, 18 degrees in Quebec City and 18 as well in Montreal, 20 degrees in Toronto and 20 in Sault Ste. Marie. Wawa's looking at 18 degrees and 19 over in Thunder Bay, 10 degrees up in Churchill and 18 in Thompson. Some showers and 20 degrees in Barons River and 24 in Winnipeg. Clear 19 in Regina and 20 in North Battleford. Buffalo Narrows is looking at 15 degrees and 17 in Stony Rapids. As we continue west, 19 in Fort Chipewyan and 19 as well in Peace River. 19 in Edmonton with some smoke, and 21 over in Vancouver, 23 in Campbell River, 17 in Prince Rupert and 19 in Fort Nelson, 13 in Whitehorse and 9 up in Rock River, clear and 19 in Fort Simpson and 17 in Norman Wells, 12 in Fort McPherson and 15 in Colville Lake, 4 degrees in Cambridge Bay and clear and 5 in Chesterfield, 3 degrees in Iqaluit and 5 in Iqaluit. Hurricane Lee is on its way to Atlantic Canada, expected to approach the Maritimes with a faster landing speed than earlier forecasts predicted, increasing the wind over western Nova Scotia and southern New Brunswick. The Category 1 hurricane begins with heavy rains and gusting winds on Thursday. As the storm moves through the Maritimes, it's expected to transition to a tropical storm on Saturday. The slow-moving hurricane may bring winds up to 80 kilometers per hour, with some areas seeing winds for up to 24 hours, resulting in possible heavy rainfall, flash flooding, and storm surges. With the likely impact on Saturday and Sunday, power outages are expected. People are asked to have food and water for 72 hours, first aid supplies, and extra batteries. Lee is the 12th storm of the Atlantic hurricane season, which runs until the end of November. A Cree scholar from the Sturgeon Lake First Nation in Saskatchewan is receiving the highest honor from the University of Saskatchewan for her work revitalizing Indigenous languages. Dr. Belinda Gagiosu Daniels is the founder of the Nehiyawak Language Experience, where she runs immersion classes to teach people the language. She was raised by her grandparents and always heard them speaking Nehiyawak, but she didn't learn it herself until she was an adult. She completed her PhD on Nehiyawak reclamation, revitalizing Indigenous languages. Specifically, the Cree language has been her life's work. She's currently teaching at the University of Victoria, but still does language Cree programming in Saskatchewan.
So this alumni Lifetime Achievement Award, what does it mean to me? Well, it means that there's been some recognition, there's been some recognition along with receiving this huge thank you of this contribution that I've been doing to and for Indigenous languages.
A children's book that tells the story of Jordan River Anderson, who lived all of his 5 years in a hospital, has been longlisted for the First Nation Communities Read Award. Jordan's principle is a federal policy that was named after him to ensure equality for all kids. The book, called Jordan and Mom, shares a small part of what his life was like. It was written by his older sister, Jerlene Anderson Sullivan. She says it's exciting to be nominated.
I just felt like their story needed to be heard. And my father, who is still with us, he decided that to give honor to Jordan's life, to allow Jordan's name to be used, in the Jordan's principle. Now, I wanted to honor them that way and telling, a small part of our story and what Jordan's legacy is all about.
Now, the winners will be announced in October. Anderson Sullivan says another Jordan book will be released soon. And with that, that is going to wrap up our Wednesday edition of APTN National News. For news anytime, you can head to our website, aptnnews.ca. For all of us here, thank you so much for joining us. Miigwech, Edmonton, and have a great weekend.